Hey.
Oh, hey Michaela, how's your report coming?
It's going, but I'm kind of behind on the research. When you guys asked if you wanted to meet up today, I was like, yes, thanks for the help.
Oh, it's no problem. Ava and I are almost finished. She's at her grandma's right now getting some more research.
Oh, okay, great. So what are some details you guys have found?
Well, the years 1933 to 1945 were pretty horrible. For 12 years, it was like the Nazis waged a war on the Jews.
That's so awful and so crazy to think about, that one person could control so many, and that so many were bystanders. And I was actually reading this book. I saw that the Jewish were passing, they just laughed. Can you believe they would do that?
Hi guys.
Oh, hey Ava, how was your grandma's?
Great. Our report is going to be totally good. Not only do I have pages of notes from her, but my bubby gave me some things to show the class.
Oh, who's your bubby?
She's my grandmother. Wait until you see them. You know, she was only a kid during the Holocaust. I've got to tell you, I didn't realize how hard it was to be a Jewish kid when Hitler was in power.
Well, from what I read, the Jewish people have been treated badly even before the Nazis came into power. In Europe, Jews were a small minority and the targets of prejudice and discrimination. There's even a word that means hatred of Jews. It's anti-Semitism.
Yeah, and the Nazi Party took anti-Semitism to a whole new level. My bubby was 10 when Adolf Hitler was elected to lead Germany. That was in 1933. He was head of the Nazi Party, and just months later, Germany changed from a democracy to a dictatorship.
That's what we were saying earlier. How could an entire country just fall one person's way?
Well, the Nazis believed that the Jews were a less than human race and had to be eliminated. Their hatred of Jews actually became law. Laws made to discriminate against Jewish people.
I did actually read about that. The Nuremberg laws. That's when they kicked the Jewish people out of the universities and took away the jobs of the professionals, like the doctors, professors, and lawyers.
And Jewish kids were even kicked out of schools. That happened to my bubby. The Nazis also took German citizenship away from the Jews.
I still can't believe the Germans didn't stand up to the Nazis. Too many people just watched.
Well, the people who did were sent to concentration camps, like the one in Dachau.
What's a concentration camp?
Well, a concentration camp was where Nazis sent minorities and political groups that they didn't agree with. Now, these prisoners were malnourished and had to do a lot of slave labor, which ultimately led to their death.
The Nazis built more and more concentration camps and imprisoned all types of people. People who didn't agree with them, people who weren't ideal Germans, and of course the Jews.
That really is terrible.
Here's a receipt given to a prisoner from the camp. They were taken of all their valuable items and were promised them back, but they never did get anything back.
That's terrible. And the Nazis didn't just stop with Germany. They conquered nearby countries like Czechoslovakia, and countries like Austria just willingly joined them. Everywhere they went, they persecuted Jews.
My bubby told me about one horrible night she will never forget. Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass.
Oh, what happened?
On the night of November 9th, 1938, almost 6 years after the Nazi Party took power, the Nazis organized a riot. They called it a pogrom against all Jews in Germany.
You see, they called it the Night of Broken Glass because these pogroms would go through the streets and break the windows of Jewish businesses, which would leave glass all over the streets.
They destroyed 1,000 synagogues and took 30,000 Jewish men to concentration camps. My great-grandfather was one.
What happened to him?
Well, he was one of the lucky ones. If you could find a country to go to, and if you had enough money to pay the Nazis, then you could leave the concentration camps. He and his family, they came here, but not many could afford to leave, and few countries wanted them. Here's a passport that the Nazis stamped a letter J on it, for Jew.
Oh, so that's how your bubby got here?
Yeah, they got here just before World War II started.
You know, just like Ava's grandma, my neighbor Mr. Bloom is Jewish too. He lived in Poland during World War II. The Nazis invaded his country on September 1st, 1939, and the Nazis forced him and his family out of their homes. They sent them to the worst part of the city with big walls built around them, and they called these walled-in areas ghettos.
Wow, really? That's actually really similar to how it is nowadays.
Huh, I guess you're right. Well, you know, there were 3.5 million Jews living in Poland at that time, so the ghettos were really overcrowded. The Jews didn't have much food or water either. They were dying of starvation and disease. It was really sad hearing Mr. Bloom talk about it. He still gets really upset when he talks about leaving his home, going to the ghettos, and having to wear a yellow star.
Mr. Bloom told you about a yellow star? That's something else my bubby showed me. A yellow star. The Jews had to wear a yellow star or an armband so everybody knew who was a Jew.
Wow, that's like putting a target right on the Jews' back saying, you can persecute me.
And that was only the beginning. German forces took over more countries. They took over countries like the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, northern France, Norway, and Denmark. In 1941, they invaded the Soviet Union, which is huge. At that time, there were 2 million Jews living in the Soviet Union.
And the Nazis changed their policy on how to deal with Jews as well. They no longer forced them to immigrate to other countries or sent them to the ghettos. Instead, they just started killing them. German troops called Einsatzgruppen shot tens of thousands of women and children every day.
I still don't understand how they could murder innocent women and children. And what's even harder to understand is the locals started to help the Nazis. How could you turn on your neighbor like that?
Mr. Bloom did say that a coward who is full of hate is a dangerous person. But he also told me of people who would risk their lives to help save the Jews. He called them rescuers.
Yeah, the resistance movement. My bubby told me stories about people and entire countries that worked secretly against the Nazis. Denmark and Bulgaria saved nearly all of their Jewish citizens. It's in this book right here. The resistance movement was in nearly every country that the Nazis occupied. Jews fought back in ghettos and even in death camps. And something as simple as sharing a slice of bread was a form of resistance.
I read about a kid in Denmark who helped save the Jews. If I would have been alive then, I hope I would have been part of the resistance movement. Those people were so courageous.
Yeah, they really were. What else did Mr. Bloom tell you, Vinny?
Well, probably the saddest story Mr. Bloom told me was when the Nazis came to his ghetto and told the Jews that they were being moved to new homes in the East. Now, some were very skeptical, of course, but some actually started to have hope. The truth of it was, they were being sent to 6 different death camps in Poland, like Auschwitz-Birkenau. Here, I found a picture of a cap that a prisoner wore in the camps, right here. Many Jews from Western and Southern Europe weren't sent to ghettos. They were actually sent to transit camps and then on to death camps. You remember what we read about Anne Frank? They escaped from Germany to Holland, and they were captured in Amsterdam, then sent to a transit camp, and finally to a death camp.
The Nazis called this the final solution. The death camps were built to exterminate all Jews in Europe. Get rid of the problem Jews once and for all.
You know, I found pictures of Jewish families being boarded onto trains to death camps. It was terrible. Families were separated and then they never saw each other again. Nazis would gas thousands of Jews every day with poison gas and then burn their bodies. And to make matters worse, they killed the children and elderly first.
Why would they do that?
Well, if you were too weak to work, you were killed. They made young men and women, even teenagers, do slave labor in German factories and in the military. Mr. Bloom said that when teenagers got off of the train, people would whisper to them, "Say you're 15, say you're 15." You had to be 15 to do slave labor, and slavery sounded like a much better option than the gas chambers. Some choice, huh?
And not just for Jews either. They decided to get rid of other undesirable people, like if you were gay or if you had a disability. But at least the Allies were starting to win the war. Look at this Nazi ring from the SS.
What's the SS?
The SS were elite German Nazis who were largely responsible for the beginning of the Holocaust.
I wonder if the Nazi who wore the ring was captured by the Allied forces.
So the Allies were starting to win, and the Germans were losing territory. Do you think that stopped the killings in the death camps? I mean, didn't the Nazis need to focus all their attention on fighting the war?
You would think so, but the Nazis kept using valuable soldiers and trains to send even more Jews to death camps. Because you see, killing as many Jews as possible was more important to the Nazis than winning the war.
Mr. Bloom said that as the Allied forces started to liberate more and more territory, the death marches began.
Death marches, what was that?
The Nazis started forcing their prisoners to march towards Germany. They didn't want their slaves to be freed. The Jews would have to walk days in the cold. They were starving and weak. They were called the death marches because so many Jews died and were killed along the way. Here, I have an SS Nazi pin that was left behind during the war. Now, of course, the German forces did finally surrender to the Allies, but it was too late for most of Europe's Jews. Mr. Bloom could hardly speak of losing his family and his village, or shtetl.
It was too late for all of my relatives who were left behind. At that time, 2 out of every 3 Jews was murdered in Europe. 6 million in all.
And over 1.5 million of them were children.
How could you kill children? And what about those who had survived? Their families had been murdered, their homes destroyed. How could you go on?
Well, it says here in this book, tens of thousands of homeless Jews were put in displaced persons camps for years. In 1947, the UN officially agreed to make a Jewish state in the land of Israel. Many of the 200,000 European Jews who had no home settled there. In Israel and throughout the world, the Holocaust survivors went on. They made new friends, went to school, got married, got jobs.
I can't imagine how hard it would be to make a new life for yourself. And hearing from people who were actually there during the Holocaust has made it so real. And I'd like to hear more stories from your grandmother and Mr. Bloom, if that's okay.
I'm sure she would. This is her high school diploma that she was given when she graduated high school. They didn't give up. They created a new life, and you know, their story is my story too.
You know, it really is so important that the story of the Holocaust be passed on to future generations, so they can always remember how courageous the Jewish people and other minority groups were to make it through such a tragic event in history.